Right. Thank you very much, Brother Mark. Thank you all for coming back. Have we still got a few on Zoom? They're all there. Wonderful. Well, they might not all be there, but some are still there, which is wonderful. Yeah, so look, we've had to think about why we should be watching. Was that okay? Are we all on the same page pretty much with why we should be watching? So this second talk is about what we should be watching. Now, obviously, there's a lot of things, isn't there, in the Bible that are about what we should be watching. So we might all have a slightly different take on this. So I can only give you my take on it. So there's a lot of moving parts. What I thought I'd do, though, isn't necessarily delve into all the nitty-gritty of everything that's happening right now in the world, although obviously that makes it into it. I wanted to try and give you, if you like, the chapter headings of the things that we should be watching, that I think we should be watching. And then, you know, that gives you some, if you like, I guess, imagine it's a jigsaw puzzle. I'm trying to say there's the picture on the box. There's a lot of pieces in it. We've all got to try and put them together, if that makes sense. I don't know if that bit did make sense. This bit is being recorded. Excellent. Okay. Right, good. I don't know what I've said so far. Hopefully I'm okay. So why do you think I put this word urgency up on here? Imperative. Imperative. So there's got to be a degree of urgency to it. That's what I think, because that's what the impression I get from what Jesus said. There's got to be a degree of urgency to it. So let's have a think about some of the chapter headings. Now, I did sort of sit down and wonder, you know, where do you go if we were going to look at things to physically go and watch? I mean, obviously, we're talking here about, in scriptural terms, prophecy, but prophecy eventually becomes history, doesn't it? Do you think that happens? Prophecy becomes history. In fact, the vast bulk of it probably has now become history. It's the very poignant bit that's left at the end that's still got to convert into history. It all ends up in Encyclopedia Britannica or on Wikipedia at some point. So we can look at ancient prophecies and it's all there. It's already happened. It's this last bit. So on the screen, I've put what I think are some of the key books. This isn't exhaustive, we know that, but there's prophecies in Psalms, there's prophecies in Daniel and Ezekiel and Isaiah and Zechariah and Joel. There's the Olivet prophecy that's really poignant that Jesus gave in Matthew 24 and Mark chapter 13 and Luke chapter 21. And I've sort of got out there on its own a little bit, like put Revelation out there, because I'm sort of thinking that it's good to put the other pieces together before you delve into Revelation. That's my gut feeling. I don't know what your thoughts of that. So I'm not saying it isn't relevant and it isn't connected, because it is, but I think it's worth getting your head around all the other building blocks first, because if you dive, we do the seminars at Tewkesbury, and we say, what do you want to do at the next? Oh, let's do Revelation. But we've not even done Daniel. We've not done any. No, we can't just go straight into Revelation. It's because they want the final. It's a bit like going to the final picture, isn't it? The final book, because that will give me the answers to everything, because it's the final book. And you do get some of the final answers in the very last couple of chapters, but you want to get the rest of it in place first. And I think the more you start looking at these, the chapters and the verses and connect them together, what I've found is over the years that it feels like that. It feels like in the Bible are the headlines of what I'm watching on the news. And that then gives more perspective, more focus as time goes on. So I was wondering what the chapter headings were, and I thought I'm going to write down in preparation, because you phoned me and texted me repeatedly. Are you on board with? Are you ready? Are you going? I said, I'm onto it, Andy. I'm definitely onto it. And then, like a bit of a thunderclap, I thought, I've done this before. I've written down the chapter headings, because back in the early year 2001, I decided to do something called a weekly World Watch. And I decided to do that because there was a brother that had stopped coming to the meetings, older than me. I'd got a lot of time and respect. He was a brilliant speaker, and he lost his faith and stopped coming. And every now and again, I would say to this brother, you know, this has happened in the world, or that's happened in the world. And he would say, yeah, I hadn't seen that. That's interesting. And then after a while, I thought, do you know what? There's so much going on. It suddenly occurred to me, it'd be a good idea to do it like on a regular basis. So I put together the weekly World Watch in October 2003. So pretty much exactly 20 years ago. And I sent it to this brother, and I sent it to 11 other brothers in Pershore meeting, said, what do you think to this? And they said, yeah, that's good. And then it carried. I didn't think I'd still be doing it now, though, because I thought Jesus's return was more imminent. Otherwise, I might not have done it, because it's now 20 years I've been doing it. But here's one of the slides. Anybody that gets the World Watch, you might skip past this and on to the action. But this is word for word what I wrote 20 years ago, and I've never updated it. And I suddenly remembered I've got the chapter headings of some of the key things that I thought we might be looking at during the World Watch. So that's me writing some stuff up there. But the yellow bit are the 6 themes. So there was looking at Israel, looking at Europe, looking at Russia, looking at UK and US, looking at moral standards, looking at natural disasters. Those were the headings. They might be the wrong headings, but that's what I put. And over the years, that's what I've tracked through. I want to show you this little video that I put together, because this is what I wrote in October 2003. And around about a decade later, so in 2013, I decided on the website, because then it got a website going. And then the number of people that got the World Watch went up. I think it's about 10,000 people get the World Watch every week at the minute. But basically, I converted these 6 things into a little tiny video that I stuck on the website. Do you want me to show you this little video? It's a little bit gimmicky, but it's got the 6 themes. That's why I wanted to show you this, and it will give my voice a break. So see what you think to this. Hi, my name's Andy Walton. First of all, thank you very much for looking at the Weekly World Watch website. I just thought I'd spend a couple of minutes just explaining why I'm doing a Weekly World Watch and what it's about. It was back in October 2003 that the Weekly World Watch began, and every week since then I've sent out a PowerPoint presentation looking at 6 things that we should perhaps be focused on to make sure that we are ready for the return of our Lord Jesus Christ back to this earth. The 6 themes that I decided to focus in on were as follows. The first theme was looking at Israel. Israel is central to the plan and purpose of the Lord God. What we have done over the last 10 years is tracked the continuing conflict in the Middle East, and how Israel's neighbours especially have fallen into a huge amount of turmoil. We've watched Syria, we've watched Egypt, and in effect we've tracked this through looking at prophecies in Isaiah, especially Isaiah chapter 13 through to Isaiah chapter 24. Another area that we've focused on during the time that the Weekly World Watch has been going is Europe. We've looked at its developing union, both in a political sense and a religious sense, but also the widening divisions between Western Europe and Russia. We've also tracked Russia, and we've had a look at how Russia has returned to its anti-Western, totalitarian, authoritarian ways. There are many passages in the Bible that talk about Russia's role in the future before Christ returns, and we're seeing all of these things come to pass before our eyes. We've also looked at the UK and America and how they are Bible prophecies, King of the South. Really, we've been looking at how their power has been draining away, again, as prophecy explains would happen. And the last 2 things that we've focused on each week are the declining moral standards in the world and the increasing amount of corruption and violence. And finally, we've looked at the increasing number of natural disasters, including earthquakes, famine, and of course huge spectacular events like the tsunamis that we've seen in recent years.
That isn't all that we look at, but those are probably the 6 main areas that we focus on each week. I do hope that the Weekly World Watch, if you register to receive it, and please do hope you find it helpful in watching what's happening. The Lord Jesus Christ said, of course, that we should watch and that we should be ready therefore for when he does return, and that if we are watching and awake, then his return will not be a surprise and it won't catch us spiritually asleep. So thank you very much for looking at the Weekly World Watch. Do click on the register button. You can always unsubscribe at any time if you don't want to receive it anymore. Many thanks.
There you go. One little video. And nothing really has changed, I guess. What has changed are the events. I look back 20 years ago at what I was putting in the Weekly World Watch, and it's just beyond imagination where we've got to over the years. And in fact, there's a brother called Miles in Canada who spoke to me quite a while ago, but said, I'm going to do a daily World Watch, and he does. Some of you might get his daily World Watch. So every day, Miles sends something out, and I get that, and that helps me do the weekly one. There's probably going to be an hourly one at some point, isn't there? The hourly World Watch. Clive, you can do that. Awesome. So I don't believe it. So what's basically happened as well over the years is that this picture, which I didn't have in my mind at the start of it all, has gradually developed and become this picture. And so I'm not saying to you, I can only say what I have seen and how it looks to me. And I'm perfectly appreciating that other people can have different angles on it. And the fact is, we all look at things from a slightly different perspective. And that's why God's thrown us all together, hasn't he? Because we together complete the jigsaw puzzle. But I, over the years, suddenly saw it like this, that instead of it just being one great big conflagration at the time of the end, Armageddon, let's call it, I suddenly saw it as different stages. And when I saw it as different stages, it made more sense to me. And I was able to sort of put different passages, instead of trying to mix it all together, I was able to sort of then see it as I'm about to show you. So most of this little presentation is about these stages and how they work, and go and look at it and see what you think. So even though they're different stages, and there are gaps between, there aren't big gaps between these stages. It sort of might feel when it's happening that it does roll a bit into one. But anyway, let me explain what we're talking about here. So stage one is what I would call, and those of you who've seen any of the videos I've done, I'd call this what I would call the initial inner ring war. This is an initial war that involves Israel and her immediate neighbors, okay? So those who are absolutely backed up close against Israel. And the key passages to look at, I think, in this regard, and we're going to have a quick look at some of them, is Zechariah chapter 12, Psalm 83, and Isaiah 17. It is a jigsaw puzzle. You've got to try and join the dots together. And we get in Psalm 83, a list of 10 tribes. And we'll have a quick look at what goes on in stage one. But in simple terms, this is a war of Israel and her immediate neighbors that Israel win, although left weakened. And there's then a temporary little point of peace, bit of security, but not for long, because into the void that's sort of left comes stage two. Stage two is what I grew up hearing. I never heard about stage one when I grew up. Nothing was ever said about stage one. It was always this bit in the middle, which is clearly super important. Stage two is the outer circle of nations that come in after the initial inner ring war has finished. And these are different. They're entirely different. There's no overlap whatsoever between the first list and the second list. I'll show you that in a minute. This is the list. This is the invasion of Gog. This is the invasion of Russia, allied with other nations that we're going to see that come in after the initial inner ring war. It's stage two. Stage 3 is another stage entirely. And again, when you look at Christadelphian writers, all of these things have tended to get mixed up into one big lump, and I just don't think they are. Stage 3 is different again. So this is basically after Jesus is here on earth, there is a conflict with Jesus when he's here. And that is detailed out specifically in Revelation 17, where it talks about a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. And there's this, and it says they make war against the Lamb and against those that are with him who are called and chosen and faithful. This isn't a war against Israel. It's the war against the Lamb and against those who are with him who are called and chosen and faithful. That's nothing to do with part 2. Certainly nothing to do with part 1. It's the latter stage. But when you read some of the stuff that's written, it's because this is Europe that we'll get on to maybe. They mix it in with the stage 2, and it isn't. I don't think it is. It's separate. In fact, stage 1, I label it up. They're not all Israel's relatives, but some of them are. This is about Israel's relatives, is the tribes that are close to Israel, which we're going to look at. Stage 2 isn't about Israel's immediate neighbors. What does anybody want to tell me, by the way, what is the motivation of stage 2? When Russia comes down, spoil. We all agree with that. It's nothing to do with them being related. This is about money. It's about spoil. It's about goods. It's about wealth. Or you could say riches. So we've got Israel's relatives. Now they're interested in Israel's riches. When this third one happens, when it's against Christ and the saints who are there in Jerusalem, because that's what Revelation 17 says it's about, what do you think that's about? Religion. It's religion. There's a religious war when Christ is actually here. So that's how I think it breaks down. Might be wrong. I can only say over 20 years, it's sort of come more into focus. You know, when there's a picture on the wall and you see it on the wall and you think, yeah, I can see that's a picture of the countryside or something. And then as you walk towards the picture, it's still the same picture. You see more and more and more and more detail. And I think that's what's basically happening. The closer we're getting to the end, more and more detail is heavy. It's not a different picture. You know, I'm not disagreeing with what people have written in the past. I just think the closer we get, the more you think, now we can see that little bit of smudgy bit there is now clear. In terms of the initial inner ring war, it's basically literally everything in red there that you see in red, right? White writing in red blocks are the tribes that are lifted out of Psalm 83. And we'll read a bit of Psalm 83 in a second, but you see how they're all surrounding Israel. This is an initial war against Israel with the sole aim of doing what, do you think? Cast them into the sea, destroy them. Which sort of is quite interesting, isn't it, at the minute with what's going on, which we'll touch on. So this is the initial inner ring war. Now, the other thing that, again, if you go back to the very early Weekly World Watch slides, they don't contradict what I'm saying, I don't think now, but it got more and more focused as time went on. And suddenly I began to see Zechariah chapter 12 as a different event to Zechariah chapter 14, because I grew up thinking it was just the same thing repeated. But the more I looked at it, the more I thought, actually, it isn't repeated. They're different. And the more I looked at it, the more I realized that Zechariah chapter 12 is about the initial inner ring war, and Zechariah chapter 14 is the outer circle war. Zechariah chapter 12 in the later verses springboards you into Zechariah 14. So there's not an absolute firm line, but the vast chunk of Zechariah 12 is about the initial inner ring war. Here we go. Let's have a look at it. Verse 2 says, I will make Jerusalem like an intoxicating drink that makes the nearby people stagger when they send their armies to Jerusalem and Judah. In if you look in your Bible, you might have a different word to nearby people. If you have a look in Zechariah 12, verse 2, what words have you got in your Bible? Shout a couple of words out, because you've got surrounding people, roundabout, you've got the AV or something like it. Mine says roundabout. When you look up the word, it means nearby, which is why you've got surrounding, nearby, as we've got in this version here. So what we're being told is that they are nearby. They're surrounding. They're encircling, hence the phrase that are coined, which was the inner ring war. They're close by and they form a ring. Now, you notice it's Jerusalem that's on their agenda. These nearby people are wound up about Jerusalem. In fact, it says Jerusalem, it's made them, your version might not say intoxicating drink. In mine, it says a cup of trembling, but it literally means a cup of staggering. And that's why some versions convert the trembling and staggering into intoxicating, because that's really what it's getting at. It's alcohol. In other words, Jerusalem, it's almost got them drunk. These nearby people living in and around Israel have gone, I'm not going to ask you if you've ever got drunk. That's a bad thing to ask you. But we all know the effects of alcohol. There's increased you look at the streets, not of Sutton Coldfield. We know Sutton's a lovely place. But let's say the cities of this world, people who've got drunk, there's violence, isn't there? There's terrible things that go on. And God's saying Jerusalem is going to impact the nearby people as if they're drunk. And they go horrendous behavior, basically. And they send their armies to Jerusalem and Judah. Now, look what happens. Because of time, this is an overview. Verse 6, on that day, I will make the clans of Judah. If you look at it, that word normally is translated governors or leaders of Judah, like a flame that sets a wood pile ablaze, or like a burning torch among the sheaves of grain. They will burn up all the neighboring people right and left, while the people living in Jerusalem shall remain secure. I think that's the NIV. So, if you decode that and put it in English, that's saying that the rulers that are living in Judah, southern Israel, they're going to become like a burning torch themselves that sets on fire the surrounding people that are trying to destroy them. In other words, they turn the fire that's aimed at them back on themselves. And it says they burn up the neighboring people right and left while Jerusalem remains secure. That is telling me that this initial inner ring war, that's Israel versus its immediate neighbors, they're going to win. And they win by bringing great destruction upon the nearby people who want to destroy them. Does that make sense? But when you look at Zechariah 14, it doesn't sound like that. It says in verse 2, I will gather all the nations to fight against Jerusalem. You notice it's switched out of people to nations. It's a completely different word. It keeps using the word people in Zechariah 12, but in Zechariah 14, it's not people, which is the word for kinsman or tribe. I'm now switching, says God, I'm telling you about nations. I will gather all nations to fight against Jerusalem. The city will be taken, the houses looted, the women raped. Half the population will be taken into captivity. The rest will be left among the ruins of the city. Does that sound like Jerusalem's secure and in its place? It's different. I don't see how we can really make it all the same. God's telling us in Zechariah 12 about the initial inner ring war and how Israel win. But in Zechariah 14, he's telling us about an outer circle of nations that come in. And they look as if they're winning, don't they? Because Jerusalem's fallen. Well, we know what happens, because in Zechariah 14, what we have is the Lord Jesus Christ arriving on the scenes. By the way, who does he arrive on the scenes with in Zechariah 14? Is he on his own? The saints. Good answer. What must that mean has happened for Jesus to have come with the saints in Zechariah 14? What has already happened? The judgment must have happened. which means Jesus has come back before Zechariah 14, doesn't it? And he has, because if you read Zechariah chapter 12, it tells you about Jesus appearing, doesn't it? It says, they shall look upon him whom they've pierced. Jesus actually does come back to in the sky. We will see him coming before Zechariah 14. So look, on this side, we've got nearby nations, or peoples, I should say, attack, but Jerusalem survives. This is all nations attack, and Jerusalem is ruined. Now, if you look at the current event that's going on at the minute, which started on October the 7th, didn't it, last year? Super significant date, wasn't it? It almost to the day, the 50th anniversary since the last major war, the Yom Kippur War. It was on the very last day of the Feast of Tabernacles. Do you think all this is just a big coincidence? I don't think so. Do you think, though, the Hamas attack was anything whatsoever to do with Jerusalem? You see there, it says that it's all about Jerusalem. Is anything that Hamas is doing and did on October the 7th anything to do with Jerusalem? Well, the answer is, it is. Because look, this is what they've called their operation. They've called it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. What is Al-Aqsa, by the way? It's the mosque. And in fact, it's more than just the mosque. You know, on Temple Mount, there's the Dome of the Rock and there's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. But in the wider Muslim world, Al-Aqsa refers to the entirety of the Temple Mount site that includes the Dome of the Rock. They call it Al-Aqsa, the whole thing. What they're saying is this is Operation Jerusalem. Because the beating heart of Jerusalem, is it not, that Temple Mount site where the original temple was in Solomon's day and David's day, that now has got a Muslim shrine stuck on it. And they're saying our operation of murdering violently in the most horrendous, horrific ways, about 1,200 Israelis, is actually all about the Temple Mount area, the heart of Jerusalem. And if you've read any of the accounts, which we don't want to, but if we did, the horror of that day was so immense and so off the scale and so completely terrible that despite the world, pretty much all nations saying Israel's gone too far, the point is it was that bad that in fact right now the Israeli population back what is happening because they cannot have it happen again. So horrendous was it. I'm not justifying what Israel's doing. I'm saying that is what happened, and that is why it was that bad that it's caused this reaction. And what God said is that they are going to go crazy as if they're drunk with alcohol, and they actually reckon a lot of them were on drugs. So when Hamas went in, a lot of them were actually drugged up to the eyeballs. You know, there's phone calls where you hear one of them talking, I've killed 30 people with my bare hands. Dad, my hands are covered in Jewish blood. I've killed them with my bare hands. I mean, it's horrendous. It is about Jerusalem. This is all detailed, I believe, in Psalm 83. This becomes part of the code to unlock what's going on. Now look at Psalm 83. It says, keep not thou silence, O God, hold not thy peace, be not still, O God, for lo, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. They've taken crafty counsel against thy people. They consult against thy hidden ones. They have said, come, let's cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. And who are these people who want to destroy Israel and cut Israel off? We give them the list of them. The tabernacles of Edom, the Ishmaelites of Moab, the Hagarenes, Gebal, Ammon, Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre, and Asher has joined with them. By the way, who wrote this psalm? Do you know? Asaph. If you look back and do a bit of digging around Asaph, guess what he was? He was a prophet. Asaph was a prophet. And he is prophesying about what we're looking at right now. We know that's the case because if you go and read Psalm 83, you'll find that it concludes with the entire world recognizing God as their creator. Do you think that's ever happened? But it is going to happen. I tell you the other thing that tells me that Psalm 83 isn't complete. When you read it, it tells you the fate of all these people that are enemies of Israel that want to destroy them. Anybody want to guess what the fate is? Wiped out. Do you know the first Asaph? It's not amusing, but he picks the most incredible example. Anybody know what example he picks? He picks an example as to what's going to happen to this lot. First on the list, he says, do unto them as you did unto Sisera. That ring any bells? What happened to Sisera? He had a stake hammered through his head to the ground. So the thing is, as long as there are still enemies around Israel, the immediate enemies, Psalm 83 has not been fulfilled. There is going to be a total end. But what is Netanyahu and what are Israel saying that they are going to do to Hamas at the moment? What do they say? It's going to come to an end. So shocking and so bad. It has to come to an end. And all the talk now is about what comes next, because it won't end with Hamas. Who's next on their list? Hezbollah. You see, when you look at it, here they all are on the map. So there's all of the people that are in Psalm 83, all of them on the map. And here is the inhabitants of Tyre. This little bit in red up here happens to be the stronghold of Hezbollah. Here is Philistia, which is pretty, where would we go nowadays if you wanted to go to Philistia? Gaza Strip. It's where Goliath came from. And you can see all of them surrounding. There's Ashur, Syria. Jordan's going to get involved at some point, but all of them are surrounding. So what we've got on the list, some of them are on the list. Here's Philistia, modern day Gaza Strip, run by Hamas. Do Hamas want to destroy Israel? It's in their charter. You can go and look it up on Wikipedia. What do you stand for? What's your manifesto, Hamas? It is to destroy Israel. That's not great. That is bad. What about the inhabitants of Tyre? There they are. That black blob there is where Hezbollah are based, all around the region of Tyre, which is, God said, part of the crew that want to destroy Israel are based in that region. What does Hezbollah want to do with Israel? Destroy them. It's in there. Look it up. What's Hezbollah's manifesto? Destroy Israel. It's not, they're not hiding it. They say it openly. We want to destroy Israel. Here's something else amazing. This is where you get into jigsaw puzzle world. So there's Psalm 83. Look, come, let's cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. And then there's the list. And at the end of the list, there's the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. I then look at cross-reference, and lo and behold, Joel chapter 3 has got exactly the same people linked together. And this is God talking. And this, by the way, is in the context of the future conflict that we're talking about here, because Joel 3 is God gathering all people. It doesn't say Armageddon. Where does it say? To the valley of somewhere. Jehoshaphat, which is in Israel, probably Jerusalem. Anyway, look what God says in relation to these people who want to destroy. God says, yea, what have you to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, which are the two cities next to each other where Hezbollah are, and all the coasts of Palestine where Hamas is? What have you got to do with me? Well, we want to destroy your people, God. That's what we want to do. We want to destroy Israel. God says, what have you got to do with me? Do you think they have got much to do with God? Do you think Hezbollah and Hamas are on God's side and working with God? No. This is what God says in Joel chapter 3, verse 8. I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hands of the children of Judah. In other words, in fact, it says, I will turn your recompense upon you. In other words, you've come to attack me and my people. I'm going to turn it straight back on your own head, it says in Joel. And then it says in verse 8, I will sell your sons and daughters into the hands of the children of Judah. In other words, they're going to win. And look what they're going to do. It says they shall sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far off, for the Lord has spoken it. well, wait a minute. The Sabaeans, the fate of some of these people, that Hamas and Hezbollah, is they're going to end up being sold to the Sabaeans. So I ask myself, I wonder where they are. I type in Sabaeans. I mean, it's not difficult, is it? I mean, nowadays we can watch what we like. I can type in Netflix and watch a movie, or I can type in Sabaeans and see where this. I typed in Sabaeans. I think, where are the Sabaeans? Look at this. They founded the kingdom of Saba in modern day Yemen. Is Yemen on the news, do you think, at the minute? Why is Yemen on the news? They're attacking all the ships coming into the Gulf there, and they're firing missiles and have tried to fire missiles at Israel. They're completely aligned up, aren't they? In fact, there they are. It's where the Houthis, see where the Houthis are down there? That's Yemen. And they're busy causing an almighty amount of havoc, aren't they? Isn't it? Do you think this is sort of beyond coincidence that in Joel chapter 3, tiny, tiny little book, talking about the time of the end, you've got all three peoples mentioned within a couple of verses. And God says, I'm going to move this lot and sell them down here. And I think that actually is going to happen. I think there will be, it's probably not every last living soul, but I think a bit like, you know, in the UK, we have the so-called Rwanda policy where we get people coming in and then we think we want to sell them off. We'll pay money for them to go elsewhere. I think that's exactly what will happen. God says, you've tried to drive Israel into the sea. I'm going to sell you to a place afar off. It's around about 1,200 miles away. We wait and see. The other thing is, of course, and this is another part of the puzzle, I think when we've got this inner ring war, Syria becomes part of it at some point. If you watch the news, you'll hear a lot about Israel striking not only Hezbollah today, they've been striking Hezbollah, and Hezbollah have been striking them today, but also they've been striking Syria. Is Syria friend or foe of Israel? Foe. Syria also wants to destroy Israel. They're technically at war. But look what's going to happen to Syria. The capital of Syria, of course, is Damascus. And it says, behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city, and it will become a fallen ruin. And it says in the verses after that, in verse 3 and 4 of chapter 17 of Isaiah, that the fortified towns of northern Israel, it says Ephraim, decoded it, because Ephraim is northern Israel. The fortified towns of northern Israel will also be destroyed, and the royal power of Damascus will end. So there's going to be a complete cataclysmic end of Damascus and of the rulers there. There he is, look, Bashar al-Assad, who runs the show in Syria just about. In that day, Israel's glory will grow dim. Its robust body will waste away. The whole land will look like a grain field. So this northern area of Israel is going to get punished. Hezbollah have got 150,000 rockets pointed at Israel. At some point, there will be a conflict, full-on conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. But Israel will win, but is left weakened. If you look up about Damascus, by the way, it tells you that on Wikipedia, that it's the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. It's never failed. It's never been destroyed. God says it's going to be destroyed. We are beginning to witness, I believe, the start of the inner ring war, which at some point, and maybe sooner than we think, start involving more than just Hamas, because it already is involving Hezbollah. And Israel, and Netanyahu said it only yesterday, we will remove Hezbollah from our border because we cannot afford to have what happened with Hamas happen again in the future. It's not going to happen. So there is this initial inner ring war that is going to take place and could well be underway, don't you think? Maybe it calms down and there's another one that comes down the line. But this is feeling highly, highly significant, hugely significant. what I then think happens is, once the initial inner ring war is over, there is some truce, some temporary peace arrangement that is put in place that Israel feels like, okay, we've won, we're weakened, but we've won. And then into this void that is left, suddenly comes these outer circle of nations headed up by Russia that pour into the void that is left. They come on an unsuspecting people that think they're now living at peace, and they're not. There's big, big trouble. And the nations have taken all of those from the list and put them on the map. Now, again, this doesn't totally line up with all the stuff that you might read, because some will say that Magog includes Germany and way over there. So basically what some are looking for is Russia and Germany to become allied, or for Russia to blow up most of Europe and take it all over. I don't think that is what Ezekiel 38 says is going to happen, and I don't believe it's going to happen. I think Magog, Meshach, and Tubal and Rosh that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38 fully describe Russia, and it isn't describing over there in mainland Europe. I think Togarmah and Gomer around that sort of area around Turkey. Libya and Ethiopia are pretty much Libya and Ethiopia and northern Sudan, and Persia is Iran. That's what I think it looks like. So to put it on the screen, you notice, look, Ezekiel 38 doesn't have any of the nations directly connected to Israel. This is because the inner ring war has already happened and they're not in the story anymore. So there's this great big fire, and the fire, I think, has been lit, and it will keep burning for some time yet, maybe not too long. Who knows how long things go on for. The fire will be put out and Israel will live in a temporary type of peace. But after that, the outer circle comes in. Now look at this. This is Ezekiel chapter 38, verses 8 and 9. This is the outer circle war coming in, but look what it says. A long time from now, you, talking about Gog, the ruler of Russia, will be called into action. In the distant future, you will swoop down on the land of Israel, which will be enjoying peace after recovering from war. And after its people have returned from many lands to the mountains of Israel, you and your allies, a vast and awesome army, will roll down on them like a storm to cover the land. What is this peace recovering from which war? When Russia comes down, you're enjoying peace after recovering from war. Any ideas which war they might be recovering from? Sounds like the initial inner ring war, doesn't it? Enjoying peace after recovering from war. And they all come pouring in to the void that's left. And what did you say, Keith, they've come to do? To take a spoil. So you've got the inner ring war there in red and the outer circle war there that comes afterwards. Also in Ezekiel chapter 38, you're not reading about a picture that looks like this. This is near Jerusalem. You can see the wall that snakes around it. It says in Ezekiel 38, verse 10, this is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind and you'll devise an evil scheme. This is talking about the Russian ruler, Gog. The whole of Ezekiel 38, by the way, is addressing one person, Gog. I'm against you, O Gog, ruler of Russia. That's who, all of it's about one person. I'm against you. And you're going to think, thoughts will come into your mind. You will devise an evil scheme and you will say, I'm going to invade this land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people. But obviously, as we just looked at, after the war, when they're living in some degree of peace, we know there's no true peace until Jesus comes back. So whatever the peace is, whatever this temporary peace, it isn't like the kingdom. It's probably more breathing a sigh of relief more than anything else. I don't know. This is Ezekiel 38. We know Ezekiel 38 is at the time of the end because look what it says. Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. But if you have a look down here, look, after many days you'll be visited. In the latter years, you will come into the land that's brought back from the sword. You will come against the mountains of Israel. That little phrase, the latter years, literally means in the distant future or in the last days. So all this Ezekiel 38 is about the distant future and the last days. So again, we then think, well, there's a great war against Israel, and it's somebody called Gog that God does not like. And he's from the land of Magog, and is the chief prince or ruler of two places as well as that called Meshech and Tubal. So you then say, well, I can't get an aeroplane flight to Magog, and I can't get a flight to Meshech or Tubal. Where are they? So you've got to go and find out. So you go and find out, and you look at some ancient books, and this is one, Antiquities of the Jews, written by this chap who looks very wise, called Josephus. And in his book, written thousands of years ago, he wrote Magog founded those that from him were called the Magogites, but who are by the Greeks called the Scythians. So now I think, okay, if he's right, then Magog equals Scythia. And then I find other books that say exactly the same thing. So now I link Magog to Scythia. Then what I go and do when I've done that is I go and look for a map of Scythia, because it was easy to find than a map of Magog. And here is the map of Scythia. Where is that pretty much covering? Where does that orange blob predominantly cover? Which country? Southern Russia. By the way, do you notice that I've superimposed on the left over there the country of Ukraine? Over 10 years ago, I did that. And it's on the weekly World Watch slides from over 10 years ago. And I've got World Watch slides that say there is a possibility that Putin will try and take that element of Ukraine, because you notice it doesn't cover all of Ukraine. It covers the southeastern part of Ukraine. You see that here? There's the border of Ukraine coming around, and Scythia went through it. And interestingly, this is amazing, the majority of people even now speak Russian in this part of Ukraine, because history can't, you know, the people still live where they live. New borders were drawn up over time. And what Putin has done is to grab that part, isn't it? If you look on a map, that's exactly the bit that he wants. He tried to take the rest of Ukraine, but he failed. He couldn't do it. And he's left with that bit down the bottom. Effectively, what he's done is tried to get hold of the last piece of Magog. And 10 years ago, I put that down saying this could happen because that seems to me to be significant. And then he grabbed Crimea. And then he went in with the war of 2022, and it's still happening now. Pretty amazing. If you want to find out who Gog is, because Gog was a real and historical person, none other, in fact, than chief of the Scythians. That's an historian that wrote that. So Gog was the, you know, like you get a pharaoh of Egypt, and you get a, I don't know, an Ayatollah of Iran, or you get a president of America or a prime minister of this country. If you were king of Magog, you were called, if you were king of Magog, they called you Gog. That was the title. So Gog was originally a real person, the leader of the Magogites. He survived as a byword for terror in later generations. So now we know for certain that Magog, and by the way, Meshech and Tubal that I didn't put on the map are the rest of Russia. So when God tries to paint the picture of who's coming down, he paints a picture of Russia. And who is the leader right now of Russia? And by the way, who will be the leader tomorrow of Russia? Any doubts on that, do you think? Or will he win, let's call it 86%? You'll get at least 86%. The reason he can do that is because it's either killed or driven into exile anybody that stood against him, mainly killed them. And the three people that are standing against him, I don't know if you saw Stephen Rosenberg from the BBC interview one of them, and he said, "You're standing for president of Russia." And he actually said, "Yeah, but I think Putin's better. I think Vladimir Putin is better." I mean, it's like, what? It's crazy. It's a sham. The whole thing's a sham. However, I think, and each time this happens, every time he gets an apparent endorsement, he uses it as a ticket to go worse. Because now he says, "I've had all of Russia vote for me. So now, look, I'm going to go up a few gears." He'll go up a few gears. He could do anyway, but he's now can say to the world, "Look, all my people are behind me." It isn't over yet in Ukraine. Oh, and by the way, of course, the situation in Ukraine, no country on earth wants to fight two wars at once. But is the direction of Russia going into Europe, or is it coming down south into Israel? And the answer is, it's got to be down into Israel, because God says they're going to come into Israel, which means the situation in Ukraine has to come to some stalemated standoff. You can't fight. No, even America doesn't want to fight two wars at once. So something's got to stop or slow right down in Ukraine, which means there's got to be some stalemate at some point. In fact, this is another subject, but have a look at Daniel chapter 8, because Daniel 8 talks about latter-day Gog, and it says he always succeeds using shocking destruction or devastation. And I think there's more yet that he will throw at the situation. And have you listened to him over the last month? Every single week for the last month, he has threatened to use nuclear weapons. He's threatened to use nuclear weapons against London, against Berlin, against America. He threatened just 3 days ago that to use nuclear. He's telling us what he's going to do. He will resort to shocking destruction. Do you remember how the Second World War came to an end? He knows that. There'll come a point. This is a man that doesn't care about people. Do you realize how many hundreds of thousands have been injured and killed in this conflict? I don't care, says Putin. It might not be Putin, but look, if we were going to paint a picture of a man that would one day come down and invade Israel, it would fit very, very well with this person, would it not? Don't you think? A long time from now, you'll be called into action in the distant future. You'll swoop down on the land of Israel, which will be enjoying peace after recovering from war. I mean, how amazing is God? Not only did he know who this person was going to be, he even knows what's going to be in his mind. You will think an evil thought and you will say, "I will go up to the land of unwalled villages to take a spoil." By the way, is there anything that would be quite attractive for Putin in Israel? Oil and gas.
Amid a raging war between Russia and Ukraine, the European Union is now turning towards Israel for its...
Let's go back. Oh, do you have to press a button? Sorry. It's coming up. Here we go.
Amid a raging war between Russia and Ukraine, the European Union is now turning towards Israel for its natural gas supply needs, as the bloc claims that it has been blackmailed by Moscow for its gas supplies after siding with Kyiv. The European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen is in Jerusalem to strengthen Union's energy cooperation with Israel, as Russia has cut down energy supplies to several European nations amid heavy sanctions imposed by the EU to curb Moscow's Ukrainian invasion. The bloc has been looking for alternative suppliers to reduce its dependence on Russia, which in turn would help them in imposing stricter sanctions on Moscow.
The European Union was the biggest, most important client from the supplier Russia, oil, gas and coal. But with the beginning of this war and the attempt of Russia to blackmail us through energy by deliberately cutting the energy supplies, we decided to cut off and to get rid of the dependency of Russian fossil fuels and to move away from Russia and diversify to trustworthy suppliers. So it is for us very important, and I'm very grateful that we are now discussing this fascinating project, that you are willing to increase the deliveries of gas to the European Union via Egypt. And tomorrow we will already take a very important step with the signing of a trilateral memorandum of understanding between Israel, the European Union and Egypt.
Russia has already come.
I think that's interesting. What do you think Putin makes of Israel doing a deal? Not a lot. My biggest partner buying all the energy off me has now cut me off, says Putin, and now doing a deal with Israel, who has made some of the largest gas finds, remarkably, in the last 20 or so years in the entire world. The Leviathan gas fields are enormous. Not only can Israel become completely and totally independent of all energy needs, it can export them straight through Egypt, out straight into the EU. So when Israel defeats Syria, and by the way, of course, we talked about Israel defeating Syria and the immediate neighbors, but what does Russia think to Syria? Are they allied with Syria? Of course so. So what you've got is Syria coming to an end as a functioning nation, living there, doing more deals with gas and energy, while Putin's cut off and isolated, and his whole brain says, I'm not having this. Not only is Israel taking out one of my key partners, and of course, he's had Hezbollah and Hamas round for a little get-together over the last few months, trying to work with them. He's not happy when all of this kicks off and goes wrong. And so he says, I am going to do it. Now, one person said to me, well, Putin can't even invade the whole of Ukraine. How on earth does he come down into Israel? But which countries are in his way to come down into Israel? Who's he got to go through? Turkey. Turkey, we're told, Togomar is allied to Russia. Russia is not going to defeat Turkey. Erdogan is on side. So he hasn't got to invade Turkey. In fact, Turkey musters all its own troops and joins forces with Russia. So that's Turkey tick, because we're going together. Who else has he got to come through? Not Iran. Syria. Syria's wiped out. There's nothing really left. Damascus has been destroyed. The Syrian army has collapsed. So, and even if that wasn't the case, Syria is on side with Russia. And now, which country am I stood in? Israel. It's a piece of cake for Russia to get down to Israel. Very, very hard to come west into Europe. Last couple of slides. So look, there's the picture. The last bit is, so what I'm suggesting to you is that I believe, now you might not go along with this, I don't know, but I actually believe Jesus appears in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory some point around the inner ring war stage. I don't know exactly when, but I think we will actually see him coming. I think then there's a time period while the judgment takes place. And after this second stage, Jesus arrives with the judge saints into Jerusalem. We're all judged at this point. We are then taken or arrive into Jerusalem. And it's after this point that we get to stage 3. And when Jesus is in Jerusalem with the saints, there is then a war against Jesus, which is a religious war. And it's all painted out for us in symbolic terms in Revelation 17, where a woman sits on a scarlet-colored beast with names of blasphemy, and you've got these 7 heads and 10 horns. We're told what they are. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings that haven't got a kingdom as yet, but they've got power as kings 1 hour with the beast. So there's a short period of time that 10 kings rise up, come together united, and look who they make war against. These shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him. Who do you think these people are? The saints. It's a religious conflagration that takes place after Jesus is here on terra firma and after the judgment has happened. So final bit, look, here's the picture. There's the world, and here is Israel. There is an initial conflagration between Israel and the immediate neighbors. That fire gets put out by Israel. Jesus, at some point around, do you know the last time actually that Jesus was ever seen? It was in a cloud, but actually there was a time after that. There was somebody walking to a city. Which city was he walking towards, and what did he see? On the road to Damascus. It's the last time Jesus was ever seen. It was to do with Damascus. He was on the road to Damascus and he saw Jesus as a bright light in the sky. And he was blinded, wasn't he? Saul converted to Paul. It's no coincidence that the last time Jesus was ever seen was in relation to Damascus. I think when Damascus falls, around about that time is when Jesus will appear once again as a bright light in the heavens. Damascus is going to fail. Syria is going to fail as a nation. And this winds up Russia, and down Russia comes. That Russia comes with Persia, Iran. It comes with Togarmah and Gomer, Turkey. It comes with Libya and Ethiopia and Sudan. And down they all come into Israel. There's an opposing force based in Saudi Arabia. It's another story. It's the story of the king of the south. But we're not strong enough to say we, Britain, America, Saudi Arabia, are not strong enough to counteract the force that's come against Israel. It needs the return of Christ into Jerusalem with the judge saints to sort it out. But at that point, when Jesus is in the kingdom like this and beginning to set it up, there is a religious war. There's a resurrected Holy Roman Empire headed up by the woman and the beast that make a religious war against Christ and the saints, but they are defeated. And from this point on, Jesus begins to establish kingdom across the world. Zechariah 14 says that at this point, the Lord shall be king over all the earth. In that day, there'll be one Lord and his name one, and there'll be no more utter destruction, and Jerusalem shall be safely inhabited. All of this watching, all of this looking, God has not wasted a single word in his scriptures. He's giving us all this detail to help who? It can only be the people living at the time of the end, because was any of that I've just gone through relevant to somebody living 1,000 years ago? And the answer's no. He's written it for the few people left on planet Earth who are alive and remain for when he gets back. Why is he bothered doing that? He's done it to help us. He's done it to help us get ready, to be on the front foot, to be awake and to be watching. We don't want to be asleep when he comes back. We want to be awake and we want to be watching, and we want to look up, because when these things begin to come to pass, our redemption draws nigh. Thank you for listening.